Hi, I'm Yaffi Lvova, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and owner of Baby Bloom Nutrition. And today I can't make that scroll. We are talking about your guts. Guts. And your guts are your intestines. And well, saying the word guts is more fun anyway. So we're going to talk about your microbiome. And your microbiome, I always think of Biosphere in Tucson, how they created this new civilization in a bubble. And that's kind of what we're talking about. It's a new biome. It's a microbiome, super teeny tiny, and it's in your intestines. And the truth is that the cells that make up your microbiome, you have about 10 times more of those cells than you have human cells in your entire body. So think about that. You are more bug than anything else. But first, I want to start by telling you what's going on with Baby Bloom Nutrition. So next Tuesday, a week from today, we have Raising Healthy Eaters, which is going to be a local live lecture. I'm doing that with Elisha Dorfman, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in eating disorders. And she and I together are going to be taking on how you can raise healthy eaters. So come join us for that. I'll throw the link to that group event, and tickets are $12. And if you're a dietitian or a teacher, we have continuing education credits available. Should probably make up that certificate. And Toddler Test Kitchen is back. I'm going to be premiering at the Farm South Mountain November 25th at 10 a.m. and it's going to be really exciting. If you have any questions about the recipe as far as any religious or allergy restrictions, please let me know. I'm happy to discuss those with you, but I don't like telling you what we're making ahead of time because life should be full of surprises. But it's going to be delicious. So let's talk about your guts. So you have your small intestine and your large intestine, and they each have individual functions. And what I love to ask my little boys, because I'm grooming them to be geeks like me, is how many intestines do you have? 2. Which one's bigger? The small intestine is bigger. The large intestine is called the large intestine because it has a bigger circumference as far as the area inside of it, but it's much shorter. I believe the small intestine, if you were to take it out and stretch it out, it would cover a football field. So it's really, really long. And I talked about that a lot in this segment, Should You Be Vegan, about the length of our intestines versus carnivores versus herbivores. And well, spoiler alert, we fall right in the middle. So anyway, so symbiosis and dysbiosis. Symbiosis is when the bacteria that is colonizing your colon symbiosis is when it's working together with the human part of your body, which, as I've said, is much less than the bug part of your body. And they work together. So let's talk about this as a zoo. And to make sure I'm staying away from any political landmines, especially on voting day, this theoretical zoo is very into rehabilitation and making sick animals better. And that's the whole purpose of the zoo. So the animals are in enclosures, regardless of the size. I'm not going to get into that as well, political landmine. So the animals heal. They get the benefit of professional and appropriate treatment. And we as the public get to learn from seeing them, watching them in action, watching them in their natural habitats, a replica of natural habitat. So that's a symbiotic relationship where the animals are benefiting because they get healed and then they get released back into their actual natural environment. And we as humans get to learn from them. So that's a symbiotic relationship. If an animal gets out of their enclosure, let's say you have a zoo with a lion wandering around, that is not a healthy relationship. That is not symbiotic. That lion is not going to be fed appropriately because they're not in their enclosure. I mean, it's difficult to feed a lion that's out roaming around, right? They're going to feed themselves, which is part of the rest of the problem. And the zoo has to be closed. Nobody really gets to benefit from the educational aspect of the zoo. And the same way, if you have your probiotics that are in your gut, colonizing your gut, if they start to get out of place, that's also a problem. And a common condition that is getting more attention lately is SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where the intestine, where the probiotics, the bugs that are supposed to be colonizing the colon, start getting up into the small intestine. And the way that you know that you should be tested for that is if you have persistent diarrhea or constipation or any kind of stomach ills. You have a lot of different food intolerances. All of a sudden, you can't tolerate anything without major constipation or pain or diarrhea. There are a lot of different symptoms of SIBO, and so it's important to be in touch with the appropriate healthcare professional. And in this case, that is not me. If you already have a diagnosis, I can help you to manage the nutritional component of that, which is really intense, but I'm not someone who's going to diagnose that. I find that the best way to get a diagnosis is to see a GI specialist or a naturopathic physician. And of course, I'm going to give a plug to my mentor, Mona Morstein, who is in Tempe, Arizona. So if you're local and you're having a lot of these gut issues and this sounds really familiar, go see Mona and tell her I sent you. So what are the causes of dysbiosis? There's a lot. There are a lot of causes. The most commonly known is antibiotics. Antibiotics used to be readily prescribed. They were prescribed a lot. They were overprescribed. And what happens is that they don't only target the pathogenic bacteria that are making you ill, they target all of the bacteria, especially if you take it orally. That pill is going to go down your GI tract and wreak havoc along the way. And antibiotics can be necessary for certain conditions, and that's fine. But if you are on an antibiotic, you need to take a probiotic as well. And you want to separate that by 2 hours in either direction so that both supplements can have their intended effect and really lead to well-being. So what else can cause dysbiosis? Pregnancy. Well, okay, so don't get pregnant. No, I'm just kidding. You just have to manage that. It's important to know your body and know what's going on and take an appropriate probiotic throughout your pregnancy. Inflammation as well, and this is a really vague term, but it really means when something gets hot and swollen and red. And we don't know that it's hot and swollen and red because it's inside of the body. So there are symptoms of that as well. But you want to cut down on any lifestyle factors that are inflammatory, stress being one of them. I am a stress ball today, and I might have to do some Tai Chi. That's my thing. You find your thing and help deal with the stress, and it's going to cut down on inflammation as well. Autoimmune diseases also can have an impact on the population in your microbiome. You want a diverse population, and anything from antibiotics, pregnancy, inflammation, autoimmune disease, and other factors that I haven't mentioned, those impact the variety and the health of the probiotics in your guts. So it's important to stay on top of that. So how can we fix it? Well, if you do have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, it's important to get an official diagnosis. And the best way that we have right now is a breath test. I've heard it's 3 hours long where you sit and blow into a bag. Sounds like a great time. But truthfully, coming from a perspective of a stressed out mom of 3 small children, sitting in a room blowing into a bag for 3 hours kind of sounds nice. I don't know how that's resonating with you, but that's not the worst thing in the world, right? And actually, although I mentioned that antibiotics can wipe out your gut bacteria and really damage your microbiome, if you are affected with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, an antibiotic regimen may be the answer. It really depends on how that test comes back and the doctor you're dealing with. Sometimes you'll have 1 round of antibiotics, sometimes you have 3. It depends on the severity of the condition and how your practitioner wants to proceed. So it's interesting how that could be the cause and the solution at the same time. And so when we're talking about actual probiotics, what are probiotics? They're these little tiny bugs that are in your guts. I think I covered that. But there are so many different kinds. The probiotics that I recommend, not that I sell anything because I really don't want to deal with doing monthly taxes, they have 10 to 12 different species of probiotics. And those are considered high quality supplements because they have that variety, and you don't find that variety a lot of times. You find Lactobacillus acidophilus, which is 1 species. You find other ones, rhamnosus, and what have you. A lot of times these probiotics come in single species, and I prefer a multi-species in order to cover bases. But let's compare that to what's actually going on inside your guts. There are 500 to 1,000 different species, and then there are strains of those species. So what's the difference? Okay, let's talk about E. coli. Is that a good thing? I made a pause there to let you kind of reflect. Think about E. coli. What do you associate it with? You associate it with chicken that's been on the counter for too long, hasn't been cleaned up well, hasn't been cooked long enough, you get very sick. And then the entire country has to recall the chicken from all of the Trader Joe's stores, and we're all, anyway, not that that happened recently. But actually that was salmonella anyway. But E. coli is sometimes found in our food source when things aren't handled appropriately. There was an E. coli outbreak with spinach, it's kind of creepy. I mean, E. coli, it's a natural thing that's occurring, but it shouldn't be on vegetation anyway. But there's one strain of E. coli that causes problems, and we all associate E. coli with that. And I believe offhand that's H1057. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that one causes problems. It's pathogenic, which means it causes disease. However, E. coli species and other strains that are not pathogenic, that don't cause disease, are at home and welcome in your gut. And so when we have a situation where you don't have, think of your intestines as a parking lot, and each car is a different type of probiotic, and they're taking up their little spaces, right? But one leaves. One leaves because of a stressful situation. You spent too much time with your mother-in-law. Just kidding, my mother-in-law is wonderful. Hopefully yours is too. But let's say you have a stressful situation and you've got some empty parking spots. That leaves an open parking spot for a pathogenic bacteria, like the bad E. coli, to come in and wreak havoc in your system. So what you want to do is to make sure that your guts stay healthy, that you have a lot of different species and strains. And the way you can support that is by eating probiotic foods, having a less inflammatory lifestyle by doing fitness Marshall videos on YouTube. Again, my thing, maybe not yours, but really he's awesome. You should check him out. And just by taking care of yourself. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes we get food poisoning. Sometimes we get a cold or a flu or what have you, and you can't really avoid that, but you can bolster your immune system in general by taking care of your gut microbiome and by feeding those bacteria. 90% of those bacteria are from 30 to 40 strains, still way more than the probiotic that I recommend. But when you take a probiotic, it not only populates your gut with the probiotic strains and species that you've taken through supplementation, but it also reinforces the different types of species and strains that are already present in your gut. So it's just like sending reinforcements. You're making the good stuff that's in there stronger so that they can populate a little easier to boost your immunity. So you should still be taking those and having probiotic foods. So what are probiotic foods? Yogurt, kombucha, although really read the instructions on kombucha. People really overdo it and you can make yourself sick. So I believe the recommendation is 4 ounces per day, no more than that. So check that out. And if you're making it at home, make sure you're in a clean environment because you could be growing bad bacteria if you don't sterilize your equipment. Okay, I'm not going to go on that soapbox. Soap, pun intended. So what do probiotics do? Why should we feed them? So probiotics ferment dietary fiber. That's good, it leads to a very pleasant gas. They also produce short chain fatty acids, SCFA, you may have seen. And what do SCFA do? They balance the pH in your intestines. And that's really important because different nutrients require a different pH balance in order to be absorbed. For instance, vitamin C requires a lot of acid. So it actually usually comes with its own acid. But that acid in your system is very important in order to absorb your vitamin C appropriately. And that's not the only nutrient. Every nutrient comes with their own set of requests, kind of like a rock star. They have their own requests. So what we need to do in order to maximize our digestion and absorption of all of those micronutrients is to maintain the pH in our guts. And probiotics help with that. They increase nutrient absorption. Well, I just explained why. They maintain the gut integrity. That means that the walls of your gut stay solid. Here's the walls of your gut, okay? You have these things sticking up called microvilli, and that increases the surface area of your gut, and that's what helps you to absorb food efficiently. When you have certain inflammatory conditions, these microvilli might shrink, and then you have less surface area, you get less nutrition, and you're going to feel the effects of that. And that's what happens with celiac disease, for example. If someone has gluten and they have celiac disease, their microvilli shrink down and they don't absorb nutrients as much, which is why there are certain health ills associated with someone who has celiac actually eating gluten. But on top of this, let's say you have these two pieces that make up your intestinal cell wall. When you have leaky gut, for example, these junctures are more loose, which means that whole molecules can get out of your gut and circulate around your system, which causes a lot of different health ills. And having an adequately stocked bug container, when you have enough of your microbiome healthy. That's not going to happen. Those junctures will stay tight and you will efficiently absorb your nutrition. It also decreases the incidence of cancer. Supports satiety, which means that the satiety is the sensation that you're full. And there are certain things that can get in the way of that sometimes, where you eat and you keep eating and you don't feel that fullness. Well, when you have adequate microbiome, you have adequate bacteria in your microbiome, non-pathogenic bacteria, that helps with your satiety. And it decreases inflammation as well, which is why how it's going to boost your immune system. So how can we make sure that our little buggy buddies in there are healthy? Well, just like we need to eat, they need to eat. So what do we feed them? And that's what prebiotics are. And the most common ones are inulin, fructooligosaccharides, and galactooligosaccharides. So write those down. No, I'm just kidding. They're often, and resistant starch. They're often just abbreviated FOS and GOS. So they're forms of fermentable fiber. And there are different ways that you can get those. One that I love is raw garlic, and that has every kind. That's got inulin, FOS, GOS, resistant starch. That's got everything you need to stay healthy. Of course, it's a little bit difficult to eat raw garlic. So what you can do is take your clove of raw garlic, and you can either just rub it on something harsh like a piece of toast. You can press it, or you can shave it onto things. And that's going to give you a real bite in your food, but it's really delicious, and it's very, very good for you. You can cook your garlic and it will have a lot of benefit, just not as much as consuming it raw. So it's really important. And I'm putting a link. I don't want to get into every prebiotic food, because the truth is that anything that has fermentable fiber in it is going to act as a prebiotic to feed your gut bacteria and keep you healthy. So I'm going to put up a link that was written by another RD. It was an Experience Life magazine, and I generally love that magazine. But it's a really well-written article that breaks down different prebiotics, where you can find them, and what different types of prebiotics are in which different types of foods, so you can geek out like me. So that is your gut in a nutshell, and how you can keep it healthy and why you want to keep it healthy. So that is nap time nutrition for today. I hope it was a wild ride. And so here's my outro. Come to Raising Healthy Eaters next week, next week on Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. at the Chabad of the East Valley in Chandler, Arizona. Everyone is welcome. Tickets are $12. Continuing education will be awarded for dietitians and teachers. And should you be in another profession where you feel like you should get continuing education for that, you can take that up with your organization. But we do have a wonderful presentation that we are excited to give. And come to Toddler Test Kitchen. November 25th at the Farm South Mountain, we're going to have a blast. That's a mommy and me cooking class for kids ages 2 through 6. Yes, 2. And if you have a child who's in a carrier or in a stroller, bring them. It's going to be a good time. I'm there with an extra set of hands, and Sarah from A Love Letter to Food is going to be there with an extra set of hands, and we're going to have a blast. So join me next week for Nap Time Nutrition right here at, thank you for the thumbs up, right here at 1 p.m. Arizona time, which we didn't change the clocks, but the rest of you did. So now that is noon Pacific time and 2 p.m., 3 p.m. East Coast time. And I'm always open to subject suggestions. So thank you, and see you next week.